Hey guys, how's it going? Kripparrian here. Card review time, boys. We got quite a few tonight, and we're starting to see a lot of the powerful legendary cards come out. And, well, the hype is coming pretty strong for the upcoming Witchwood expansion. Kick it off today, we have Sound the Bells. 2-mana paladin spell. It's common, so it should be pretty relevant in Arena. It's Echo, and it gives a minion +1/+2. So we basically had this, but it didn't have Echo, but it cost 1 mana, and it sucked in Constructed, and it was pretty good in Arena. So at 2 mana, it's probably going to suck even more in Constructed, and it's probably going to actually be better in Arena, because in Arena you do run out of cards. If you're playing a fairly aggressive deck, it can be very good. A lot of the classes that are starting to show high win rates in Arena right now are those that don't have pings. How about that? Shaman's really good right now, Paladin's pretty good right now, Warrior's pretty good right now. Warrior arguably has some pings, but the idea is if you're not playing against a class with pings, you can often play like 3 of these for 6 mana, and instead of trading downwards into your opponent's minions, because in Arena is a lot about, oh, he has a 4/4, I'll play a 5/5. So with this card, you can take your 4/4s, in my example, let's say 3 of them, and kill 3 of your opponent's minions. And if your opponent doesn't have a board clearer to counter that immediately, he's going to lose the game because he's so far behind on tempo. So the card's actually pretty damn good. In Constructed, this is typically not the case. Aggro versus aggro, you probably can't afford to put that much mana into your minions. And Control versus aggro, well, board clearers are typically just going to clear your board anyway if your minions have 2 health or 4. So it's quite weak in Constructed. I don't think we'll ever see it there, but it is actually pretty strong Arena card. And it has some synergies out there. Some people talk about a lot of different things, but I think the main synergy here is Wild Pyromancer, because a lot of the Paladin decks in Constructed might have Wild Pyromancer anyway, typically the control ones, and this is a great activator for Wild Pyromancer. So that's why I don't think it's totally dead in Constructed. If it's ever going to come about in a deck, it's probably as a result of this combination. Cheap Shot, another 2-cost Echo card. It's for Rogue this time, deal 2 damage to a minion. Very much the same as the last card. Really good in Arena. In Arena, you often run out of cards. In Arena, you often eviscerate something for 2 on turn 2 and don't feel too bad about that. In Constructed, that's not the case. Even though you might be able to build a deck around this card, make a lot of use out of it, it just doesn't seem that mana efficient. And Rogue is largely about, well, mana efficiency. So, doesn't look as good for Constructed, but we'll see. And we have a Warrior Legendary, the Tower, the Black Hell Gunspire. It costs 7, it's got 8 health, it's got 3 attacks, so it can defend itself okay against a bunch of small minions, and it can't attack. Whenever it takes damage, you do 3 to a random enemy, so that could mean random enemy minion, or random enemy as in your opponent's face. Now, a lot of people are laughing about this card and saying it's terrible and all that. Now, it certainly doesn't look that good, but I have to say that we often talk about how dead Warrior has been in Constructed for a while now, since Pirate Warrior got nerfed at least. Certainly, the recent versions of Warrior, at least. Now, one type of Warrior that just keeps coming back from time to time, as bad as the class is, as weak as the options are, when too many people play aggressive decks, someone just plays a crappy mid-range / control warrior with every single whirlwind effect they can get and crushes these aggressive decks. And I feel that's pretty likely to happen. Historically, aggro decks are really good. They just never die off. If there's ever a period where this type of warrior comes back, I imagine this card will be part of that list. So as bad as it might look, as memey as it might look, I think this card's actually eventually going to be something you will encounter on ladder, though maybe not on like the top deck websites. But still, pretty cool card, and I look forward to playing around with it a little bit. Another legendary, Priest Legendary, Lady in White. So it's a 6-mana 5/5, which is terrible stats. The battlecry casts Inner Fire on every minion in your deck. When people saw this card, they're like, oh my god, absolute trash minions with high health are now really good. No, it doesn't work that way. It's a 6-mana 5/5, so it's not good stats, and it's turn 6. So if you're a garbage minion, if you want to play like a Lightwell, it's not going to work very well for you, because the cards that might not get buffed, that are otherwise useless, are going to be really bad a lot of the time. This card is as good as its position in your deck. If this is in the top third of your deck, this card is very good. If this card is in the bottom 5 cards in your deck, this card is absolutely horrible because it only buffs the rest of the cards under it in the deck. So it's kind of a high roll card, and it's a card that you can't rely on, but it's a pretty good support card. There are a lot of cards that are being used that just naturally have high health because that's what Priest does. It plays high health minions, utilizes hero power very well. We're talking about Northshire, even Doomsayer is good. A lot of the taunts that Priest use are very good. The Stonehill Defenders are very strong. There's a lot of very good options for this card, but you have to be playing that deck anyway. I don't think Lady in White is strong and consistent enough to build your deck around this card, unless they come out with a card that fishes this effect from your deck. Now, if that happens, that's a totally different story, but we don't have that yet, and, well, we'll see, I guess. We have Rogue card, also 6 mana, Cursed Castaway. It's a rush minion, 5/3 pirate, and a death rattle draws a combo card from your deck. Now, a lot of the combo cards are pretty good, but I don't think it's really worth the effect. I think while drawing a specific card can often be better than drawing a card in general, so you might think of this death rattle as being better than draw a card. I'm not so sure that is necessarily the case because the card that draws it is so clumsy, costs so much mana, and often will not do enough. So I'm not sure if I'll put it in that category. It's an interesting card nonetheless. Rush makes it just hit something right away for 5, so you can do 6 mana, deal 5 damage to something. I guess put a death rattle on the board, which has some synergies in the rogue class, and draw a somewhat specific card from your deck. That is a decent power level, but cards with decent power levels typically do not see constructed play. In Arena, I think this might be alright, but I still think it costs a bit too much mana. Some people have compared this to like Starfire, but Rogue has a lot better cards than Starfire. Starfire is like an okay Druid card. Comparing an okay Rogue removal spell to an okay Druid spell is not really the case. Rogue has much better removals, so that's why I don't think this card is that great. And we have the other Priest Legendary, Chameleos, a 1-mana 1/1, and each turn this is in your hand, transform it into a card your opponent is holding. So after number of turns, you'll have a pretty good idea about what your opponent is sitting on in his hand, which is a really big advantage, actually. So it's very good when your opponent doesn't just empty out their hand every turn. So basically, it's very good in control matchups. Also in control matchups, you typically have your heavy cards remaining at the end of the game in your hand, and typically in control versus control, the deck with the heaviest options tends to win. So it's extremely good in Priest control matches. So Priest versus another control deck, this card is ridiculous, and it might be so good that it might just be an auto-include in every Priest deck. I think there's a good chance of that, but understandably, it's quite bad against aggro decks. A lot of aggro decks have synergies. A lot of aggressive minions aren't that good by themselves. They need follow-up, they need board control, they need to win more position. Cards like Divine Favor are going to be just worthless. So against aggro, this will hit a lot of worthless cards. Against aggro, you are not going to be able to make use of your opponent's cards very well. Against aggro, you're typically going to want to get other cards like board clears and stuff like that. So getting like a Knife Juggler out of Chameleos is just totally worthless. So it really depends. Like if Priest has no issue dealing with aggro decks, or not much of an issue dealing with aggro decks, but it's fringe against other control decks, this card's just going to be meta defining. But, that's a pretty narrow case. The downsides of this card that people don't realize in terms of the mechanics is this is a start of turn effect, but your turn starts before you actually draw the card. So if you're in top deck mode and you get Chameleos, this card will do literally nothing. The turn that you get Chameleos, it is a 1-mana 1/1. The next turn, it transform itself into a card your opponent is holding. So if you're ever in top deck mode, this is horrible. And a lot of time against those aggressive decks, you are in top deck mode. If you're playing against, other decks that just flush out their hand as fast as possible, well, your opponent might just not have any cards in hand, so it might just transform itself into nothing. So there are some real downsides to this card. A lot of people have just lost their mind over it. Now, it's certainly, again, one of the best cards I've ever seen for control versus control, but that's it. It's not really good in the other matchups. It could be good enough to use in every priest deck because it's so good in control versus control. And we have Duskhaven Hunter, 3 mana, 2/5. Again, another start of turn effect. It has stealth. So the idea is, I think typically as a hunter, you want to play this as a 3 mana, 5/2 stealth because you want to do damage. That's kind of what hunter does. 2/5 stealth, not as good. 3 mana, 5/2 stealth is actually pretty overpowered. So that's why I would say the swapping effect in this case is actually a downside. So that's kind of interesting. The idea is if you have this when the game starts, so if you mulliganed into this card or if you kept this card, on turn 1 it'll flip, on turn 2 it'll flip back, and on turn 3 it'll flip. So on turn 3, when you want to play it on curve, it will be a 3 mana 5/2 stealth. Now, if you draw this on turn 2, that's fine because it won't activate the turn that you draw. It'll activate the next turn, which is turn 3. So this card is great as long as you want a card like that. You have it in your opening hand or mulligan into it, or you draw it on turn 2. It's a pretty bad card if you draw it on turn 1 or turn 3 or just later in the game. So that's why it's kind of a mixed bag. I think it's overall a pretty weak card, but certainly an interesting one I wouldn't mind trying. Another hunter card, we got Tox Monger, 4 mana, 2/4. Whenever you play a 1-cost minion, give it poisonous. That is extremely strong effect, but the card is very crappy stats. In terms of stats, that is 3 mana worth, if that. So the card itself is really bad. You're going to have to base your deck on it, and if you don't draw it, that might be a really crappy deck. 1-cost minions of note, probably Elven Archer, given a poisonous on play effect, is so good. If you have this and Elven Archer, it's probably just worth it, but what if you just never draw this? How good is Elven Archer? It's not very good. So a lot of cards are in that category, and it overall looks like a pretty clumsy archetype, even though the power level of the card, at least the ability of the card, is extraordinarily high. New Druid card, we got Witching Hour. Summon a random friendly beast that died this game. How about that? This card is possibly what it's going to take for Beast Druid to see some kind of play, because it's a friendly beast, so it has nothing to do with your opponent's plays or anything. You can just play a few very strong beast minions and get tempo mana cheating later on. Something Druid, I think, could thrive off of in a big way. So extremely powerful card in the right circumstance, and we'll have to see if that circumstance comes about. It was also paired with what's that? It's a 5 mana gigantic taunt minion. Now, it gets a lot smaller if your opponent has cards in hand, but typically a low attack, high health taunt minion is best used against an aggro deck. And aggro decks do not hold very many cards, so this card's actually crazy good. It's neutral. If you can pull it out of a Firelands or an Evolve or anything like that, you can Witching Hour it. It's low mana cost enough that it's going to improve the options from the Deathstalker, Rexar, Hunter, Death Knight hero card. Just so many cool things are going to come about from this card. I think we're going to see, I'm not sure in which form yet, but we are going to see this card seeing some kind of play. The power level is just really high. It's really good against aggressive decks, and aggressive decks have always been around. New Paladin card. Once again, it can get taunt. If you're holding a dragon, at least. 2 mana, 2/2 taunt Divine Shield if you're holding a dragon. If not, it's horrible. So, I don't know. Seems alright. I mean, Minibot was good, but how many dragons do you really want to play in Paladin? That's a real question. We'll have to see. I feel like Paladin has enough extremely high power level cards that's just fine. But I can't say that with too much confidence. We'll see. We have a warrior weapon, Woodcutter's Axe, 2 mana, 2/2, so pretty decent, and the death rattle gives +2/+1 to a random friendly rush minion. So basically you play this, and you're hoping to play a rush minion on either the next turn or the one after that, because you don't want to hang on to a 2/2 weapon that much, as it loses value considerably when you enter like turn 4, 5, 6. So yeah. Interesting card, can be very good. A lot of these warrior rush mechanic cards like this one seems to form kind of like a mid-range warrior deck. Mid-range warrior decks, I think like they're fairly good, but I don't know how well they're going to match up against some of the other actual aggro decks, like any of the aggro paladins, for instance. I think they will struggle, but we'll see. We got another warrior card, Deadly Arsenal. It's a 6 mana board clear that deals damage to all minions based on a weapon that you reveal from your deck. So big weapons are, we got Gorehowl for 7. That's a pretty decent card, but it's not too good of a card. Control warriors are generally good against aggro decks, so you have to play a large minion to a large weapon to have this be good against aggro decks. Kind of, I don't know. It's kind of like a mess. Arcanite Reaper is alright. In Wild, you have Deathspite. There's like the 2 mana weapon that's 0 attack that has attack based on your total armor. And if you have an upgraded hero power or something like that, or one that costs less, I don't know how you're going to work that out. Maybe that's okay. I'm kind of grasping at straws here, though. This card on a base power level is very low. It's similar to Dragon Fury. But it costs 1 more mana, and it's harder to play big minions than it is to play big spells. So that's pretty rough. Then we have a Druid Legendary. 5 mana, 3/7. The first card each player plays on each turn costs 0. So the idea of this card is you play this, and then your opponent can't play very much, and can't kill this, and then on your next turn, you can play like a 10 mana card for 0. Sounds really good, right? No, that's really bad. The only way this card is going to be decent is if you can cheat it out into play without actually using the card. The only way I thought of doing this is by using a Carnivorous Cube. So if you play this and then cube it, it's not technically in play. And then if your opponent can't kill the cube without playing a card first, you can kind of hide it within the cube and maybe do some kind of combo later on. But that's pretty obscure, and that's about all I could think of. The idea of just playing this card flat out and giving your opponent potentially a 10 mana tempo lead, oh, it's just horrible. This card cannot be played when you're behind. This card cannot be played against decks that can remove it. Honestly, I think this card just cannot be played. But if there comes a way where you can just drop this card into play through some kind of effect or like start of turn ability or something, I don't know, it doesn't exist yet, except for maybe the cube. If you could do that fairly consistently, it could be the new form of combo druid, but we're not there yet. And this card, I think, is one of the worst cards in what we've seen so far, unless it gets support. Then we have Witch's Cauldron, a 3 mana 0/4, and if a friendly minion dies, you add a random shaman spell to your hand. It's a neutral card, so that's kind of cool. I like that idea. That sounds kind of fun. In terms of value, we have like 3 mana draw 2, which is kind of played, but a lot of shaman spells suck. A lot of them are really good, but a lot of them are like buff your totems or buff your minions based on how many totems you have, or garbage like that. So I think that for this card to be worth it, you need at the very least 2, probably 3 friendly minions to die. Now, if you can do that, it might seem like a pretty good card, and it probably is for Arena because of that fact, but in general for Constructed, the flow of gameplay makes this card bad, I feel. The issue is that you can only really trade 3 friendly minions if you're doing pretty well on the board. So you would only include this card in a deck that would be doing pretty well for board control. So basically like an aggro or mid-range deck. Why would an aggro and mid-range deck want to forcefully trade to get random shaman spells? It really wouldn't. The only deck that you'd really want to get random shaman spells would kind of be like maybe a mid-range control style deck, but then if you're playing that, how likely are you to have minions on the board that you can trade into your opponent's minions? Not very likely. The only card that I think works with this pretty well is like Unleash the Hounds. This and Unleash the Hounds, it's a pretty strong combo. You might get yourself like 4 or 5, maybe if you're really lucky, 6 shaman spells. Is that good? Yeah, that's pretty good. But that deck has to first exist, so we'll see. But a card that does help it exist, Wing Blast. 4 mana, deal 4 to a minion only, and if a minion has died this turn, doesn't have to be yours, could be your opponent's, this costs 1 instead. So it's 1 mana, deal 4. It's tricky though, it's tricky. I feel like Hunter is pretty cutthroat on the board when it comes to minion combat, and even though this card looks quite good, I have to wonder to myself, when is this card really that much better than Hunter's Mark? And the truth is, probably not very often. So, I don't know. Good card, but I don't see how it's going to see a lot of play. And then lastly, we have another Hunter card. We have Rat Trap. It's a 2 mana, of course, Hunter Secret. So after your opponent plays 3 cards in a turn, summon a 6/6 rat. It's a 2 mana 6/6, boys. That's ridiculous. Now, I have a pretty skewed opinion on this card. I almost never play aggro decks when I play Constructed, so I actually don't have a great feel for how often I am playing 3 cards in a turn. But I can tell you, from playing combo decks and playing control decks, I basically never play 3 cards in the same turn. So that's a bit of a problem. This card is extremely polarizing, where it's probably completely useless against control decks and probably mid-range decks, but it's absolutely crazy when played in the early game against aggressive decks, because either they give you a 2 mana 6/6 or you stop them from tempoing you out with loads of cards being played on any given turn. Just honestly what aggro decks typically do. So you can't call it good. You just have to see. If players are playing a lot of cards, you can tech this into your deck. If they're not, you need to remove it as fast as possible. So a lot of interesting stuff, a lot of cards that have a wide range of power levels given many different circumstances, so it should be a lot of fun to explore all of these and see where they end up. For now, that's it. Hope you enjoyed my review, and I'll see you guys in the next one. Well, hey there, Kripparrian here again. Bet you love that video because you're watching this right now. Want to give you guys a quick message. Haven't been editing these videos for years now. A lot of you guys know already, but some of you don't. My wife Rania has been doing all of the video editing, all of the amazing thumbnail creation. This is some of her work, her amazing Photoshop skills, the Krippification of the Hearthstone characters. I think the Burgly Bully is in fact her masterpiece. Well, she's also been streaming this stuff. She's streaming the video editing. If you want to get some sneak peeks on tomorrow's content, if you want to see how she is making these amazing thumbnails, she's streaming all of that almost every day. I got a link below for you guys to check that out. She's also been playing games, often with me in the evenings during my stream time. She's streaming more than me, so why don't you give her some of your appreciation because, well, she deserves it. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you guys in the next one.